morning and welcome to this training module. What are we going to look at today? In this first video, we will cover the basics about surgical lighting in operating rooms. Together, we will look at two aspects. First, we will offer an overview of the evolution of the operating room lamp. In order to offer a comprehensive definition of an operating room lamp, we will now begin our journey of exploration by examining the historical development of this medical device. This step will enable us to reach a point where we have a thorough understanding of its evolution. In today's world, the scialytic lamp plays a crucial role in the operating room by providing essential illumination. The right lighting is of utmost importance during surgery. Considering the historical context, it is evident that man has always valued the role of light, especially in relation to its application in medical settings. It is clear that man has always sought the right lighting for each of his actions. Every work requires the right illumination. Without the right illumination, it is not possible to complete the work. Therefore, light has always been central and fundamental, and so it has been in surgery as well. In order to appreciate the centrality of light in surgery, however, we must trace the history of the evolution of this product. Looking at the evolution of the surgical lamp is a path, however, that cannot be limited to the study of the transformations of the lamp itself, but it is a path that must also look at the progress of medicine, social changes, and architectural innovations that have taken place over the past 150 years. Before addressing the history, however, I will allow myself a little analysis, an etymological analysis on the meaning of scialytica, because we refer to lamps as scialytic lamps, but what does scialytic mean? Scialytic is a compound word, specifically a two-word compound word, skia and litikos. Skia is the Greek word for shadow, while litikos describes the ability to dissolve something. Basically, putting them together, we see how scialytikos identifies something capable of dissolving shadows. That is, and it is from the union of these two terms that we understand the word scialytic. And in fact, the term scialytic appears in the early 20th century for the first time in dictionaries, however. We have to wait until the 1950s before the term scialytic was finally associated with a lamp. When the French company BBT filed the trademark for its scialytic product, associating the term scialytic with a lamp, this event marked the beginning of the connection between the term scialytic and lamps. Ever since then, surgical lamps have been referred to as scialytic lamps. Certainly, acquiring awareness about the meaning of the term scialytic lamp is necessary to better understand the function of this product. However, in and of itself, it is not enough. It is still important to dwell on other aspects. And so, as we anticipated the opening of this video, we are going to closely inspect several aspects that have allowed the scialytic lamp to become a standard product in the operating room. So let us start with this journey by defining the context in which the early modern surgeons operated. In the wake of what were the Renaissance anatomy theaters, we recall the one in Padua where Galileo Galilei operated. Professors and doctors used to operate on bodies, and yes, generally we are talking about dissection of cadavers before a large audience of students. As the years went by, however, the activities carried out in these settings began to not be limited solely to human autopsy. Indeed, in the 19th century, we have evidence through several contemporary accounts of operations carried out in these theaters. Among the interventions, the most numerous turn out to be amputations and secondarily dental surgeries. These two were for a long time the only interventions practiced, and we had to wait a long time before medical development allowed the spectrum of available interventions to be broadened. Thanks to breakthroughs in bacteriology by Louis Pasteur, advancements in the understanding of sepsis by Terrier, and the invention of antisepsis by Lister, the spectrum of surgical operations we were able to perform greatly expanded. Research and these important contributions paved the way for new possibilities in the field. Indeed, it had become possible to operate in depth, and this made it possible to operate on the abdomen, the thorax, It was made possible to remove tumors and also correct uterine abnormalities. In essence, the number of surgeries increased. The idea of sterilization, of sterility, increases. The standards for operations have undergone such a significant change over time that it has become impractical to perform surgeries in large areas with crowded operating rooms. Previously, the act of a surgeon opening a closet to put on scrubs stained with blood from previous surgeries was regarded as a symbol of experience, but it is now no longer deemed acceptable. Procedures have advanced, and it is now universally acknowledged that this practice is completely unacceptable. During surgical interventions, sterilization procedures become crucial, and the routine sterilization of instruments gains more significance. Both literature and practice increasingly prioritize prevention and allocate more space and authority to it. This, in addition to changing manners, brings forth a new concept regarding the surgical environment, a new idea, the idea of the operating field. Closely related to the concept of the operating field, that of the operating room. And in fact, in the year 1880, the then surgeon Edmond Delorme developed in the Paris Military Hospital in Val-de-Grâce, near the military school, the first operating room. And just like in the past, the advancement of medicine has allowed for the progress of surgical procedures. In this period, as the operating room was being defined as a standard environment, revolutionary developments in surgical instrumentation took place that led, in addition to reconsidering operating spaces, also to address new arising needs. Dedicated instrumentation is developed, the operating table is modernized, the autoclave and steam sterilizer appear, and instruments are no longer made of ivory but are created from metal, specifically steel. In comes into being a procedure with its own rules and ways. The size of spaces required to be reserved for surgery shrinks and transforms. While in the amphitheaters, the necessary light was provided by large skylights placed in the center of the room. With the emergence of this new concept, this new idea of the operating room, also comes the need for lighting technology. It is important to adequately illuminate the operating field. How? You have to rely on technology. During these same years, another innovation was completely revolutionizing the world of lighting, electricity. The potential was enormous, but it had to be specifically adapted to a surgical context, meaning that in the operating room it was necessary to obtain a bright light that could be oriented as needed and that minimized shadows. It was Professor Louis Vérain who first developed surgical lighting with these characteristics. The revolutionary idea he had was to inscribe the operating room in a huge dome carpeted with many different light sources, whose light beams were directed on the surgical field in the center of the room. In his design, along the entire surface of the vault were positioned a number of lamps, and a room operator was in charge of turning each light on and off depending on the type of surgery and its requirements, the position of the surgeon and that of his assistants. Through a console outside the surgical field, the operator could intervene by turning on and off the lamps necessary and functional to ensure adequate illumination on the surgical field to operate. In 1919, at the University Hospital of Algiers, Professor Louis Vérain, by taking advantage of the availability of electricity, created, to all intents and purposes, the first operating room lamp. This discovery offered the possibility for the first time to artificially illuminate the operating room. Thanks to this invention, operations could then take place at any time and were no longer dependent on weather conditions and certainly not limited to daylight hours. Vérain, with his illuminated vault, devised the first scialytic lamp, but it was only through collaboration with the French company BBT of Nancy that this project, that of the scialytic lamp, finally reached industrial maturity. Together they devised this huge dome, a dome with a diameter of more than 2 meters that was anchored to the ceiling through a central axis and moved along rails, sliding along rails around a glass vault that separated the lamp from the field, the operating room. So while the lighted vault of 1919 that we spoke about was the first proper electric lighting system for surgeries and operating rooms, the new system developed by the French company together with Professor Vérain established the birth of the lamp as its own element distinct from the architecture of the rooms. The lamp that was used in this context greatly diluted the shadows of the objects in between the lamp and the surgical field. Vérain had in fact cleverly designed it so that the light beam from the central bulb would reach the operating table only after being reflected by a mirrored circular band surrounding it on all sides. However, although this solution succeeded in offering numerous advantages, it was extremely expensive and difficult to implement. It was also almost impossible to introduce it into established hospitals. It was impossible to reorganize the rooms to allow this type of solution to be installed. The idea was ingenious. This was indeed the type of lamp needed to illuminate operations. However, an alternative to the size of the reflector had to be found, and above all, another solution than that of a central ceiling anchorage. What was needed was a lamp on a mobile, a lamp that could be moved from one room of the hospital to another, and that could be used by multiple professionals and for multiple operations and different surgeries. It therefore became essential to find an alternative solution. But which one? Well, the answer was not long in coming. Instead of anchoring the reflector to the ceiling, they reduced the size of the reflector. The reflector was installed on top of a movable stand. Thus was born scialytic, the first proper scialytic lamp. As with the previous innovations, the authorship of the discovery belongs to Professor Louis Vérain's collaboration with the French company BBT. Thus, finally, in 1960s, the scialytic lamp becomes a medical democratic device present in every operating room in hospitals all over the world. From this moment on, the scialytic lamp established itself as the best possible solution for operating room lighting, without undergoing any particular changes over time. Over the years, we will see the transition from the traditional halogen bulb to the LED solution, but for this specific topic, we refer to the related video. To summarize then, in this video we have addressed the development of medical lighting, which parallels and follows step by step the evolution of surgery. As the years went by, the more the surgical discipline specialized, the more the need for adequate lighting became necessary. Thus, we have seen how originally natural light was sufficient, illuminating 19th century amphitheaters through large skylights. Later, when the importance of an aseptic environment was understood, the operating room shrank and became more specialized, allowing increasingly intrusive surgeries. In the same years, the advent of electric light had brought about enormous changes, and it was now becoming more and more necessary to have a specific lighting system for the operating room. It was Vérain who revolutionized this area, first with his light vault, later with his invention of the scialytic lamp. From this time, the latter proved to be the absolute best solution for lighting in the operating room, a role it still plays today. So I look forward to seeing you in the next videos. Have a great day.